Hello, this is going to be a little bit different to my normal content. I'm going to be doing a review of a master's thesis about Projekt Melody. Even though I have most likely said this is a reaction, it's not a live reaction and it's not a blind reaction. I've gone through this document several times and made notes and things about what I'm thinking. In particular, this is heavily edited to remove all the times I've stumbled, got stun-locked, or gone blank. I know some people have joined me for my math content, and that will still be coming. I'm currently working on a course into lambda calculus and type theory, but this caught my attention and I wanted to talk about it right away. Indeed, I have a belief that the two cultures, that of the humanities and STEM, need to be unified. I wish to contribute to that by using my channel to cover both of these type of subjects. With that prerequisite, indeed, I've already taken notes, and when I look to the side, that's me checking on my notes to remind me of what I intended to say when I talked about this. The author of this paper is not a prominent person, and it feels dangerous to introduce too much attention towards her. I am fully aware of the dangers of cyber mobbing and that type of undue attention. I see myself as a product of the academic tradition, in that I wish to engage with arguments and ideas rather than with people. And I hope that my community will follow in that tradition and not harass or bring undue interactions with the author of this paper. Due to those concerns, I have removed certain identifying information that would make such a task trivial. I am aware that this could be seen as a form of plagiarism. I have also made efforts to contact the author, and if she is comfortable with her name and affiliation being made public in relation to this, I will update the description and include those details. Who am I, and through what authority or experience do I have to talk about somebody's work? Firstly, my arguments should be able to support themselves without the justification of any form of authority. But if you are inclined to take those type of things on board, I am a small VTuber, and I have been an independent small VTuber for 2.5 years. Over that time, I've streamed in excess of 1,000 hours total and have published 100 long-form videos, many of them being essays or educational videos. I have a Bachelor of Computer Science, which, by the Curry-Howard isomorphism, means that I have a Bachelor of Mathematics. In addition, I have half of a Bachelor of Arts, which I unfortunately had to abandon due to economic reasons. I have taught in the university sector and outside of the university sector. In addition, I have worked as, a para-academic, doing technical and other related services for the academic community and particular universities. My research focus, which is a handy rebranding of my autistic special interest / ADHD hyperfocus, is in VTubing, especially in particular with the Lewdtubing community. And another interest I have is in Japanese culture and its reflection in the areas outside of Japan. In addition, strong interest in mathematics, especially foundational mathematics, and how it relates to computer science. In this reaction, I'll be going through the document, reading highlighted points that caught my attention and that I wanted to respond to. Sometimes this is going to be to confirm or strengthen some of the ideas, and other times it will be to react and present an antithesis to the ideas being presented, or share my knowledge on particular facts. Where I can, I will be including clips and other bits of evidence because I don't like blindly asserting something where I can present the evidence. I feel it's a bad style. That being said, let's go forward. And we are reading from Projekt Melody, Avatar Sex Work, The Technological Prostitute Imaginary, and Intimate Labour. And this was submitted as a master's thesis. So this is probably the capstone research effort of a master's thesis, which is what you would do before you go on to do your full PhD. Projekt Melody is an avatar, sex worker, streamer, and content creator operated by anonymous individuals. I think before we dive into this document, we have to talk about who Projekt Melody is and how she performs her art. On the erotic streaming site Chaturbate, Projekt Melody uses a 3D avatar, much like the one I'm using at the moment, however much more advanced, as she has access to full 3D tracking of her body. In addition to that, she has face tracking. The motions of her eyes, mouth, etc. are monitored, while on Chaturbate, she has connected to her body various sex toys which can be remotely activated by people tipping her money. In addition to that, while she is streaming, in order to comply with the rules of the Child Protection and Obscenity Enforcement Act, her body is monitored by a separate camera whose stream goes back to Chaturbate but is not released publicly, which is monitored to check that the person who is inside Projekt Melody is correctly registered and credentialed with Chaturbate. In this paper, I intend to provide an intersectional analysis of the ways which Projekt Melody simultaneously subverts and reinforces structures of power and provides a compelling glimpse into the future of sex work in the age of adult content platforms. To briefly explain what intersectional analysis is, it is a type of feminist analysis that takes into account things such as racial dynamic, power and wealth, trans issues, all of these different axes of oppression and privilege that exists within our society. We know nothing about the human or humans who created this technological avatar, including whether any of them are women, but despite this, or because of this, its success in the new age of platform-based sex work has been astronomical. The entity's Twitter account boasts roughly 618 followers, and their Pornhub account over 83,000. Throughout this paper, I will resist using gendered pronouns for Projekt Melody and instead refer to the character by they, them, their full name, or PM. As an avatar serving as a representation of anonymous operators of unknown genders, it is important to make a distinction between Projekt Melody and the embodied personhood and additionally femininity and feminine gender identity. I have an issue with this, the way this is presented. One of my primary concerns is the dehumanization of others. When we dehumanize someone, we reinforce oppressive norms and we make it easier for ourselves to carry out acts that are harmful. Because of this, I have become super sensitive to dehumanizing language. We do not refer to a person as an entity. Projekt Melody identifies as a woman. She uses she, her pronouns.
1, I don't have a penis, and 2, I also don't identify as such, so I don't know what to tell you there.
Her friends, when referring to her, use she, her pronouns.
Is Melody still busy?
She's busy?
Whoever is watching? I think she's still kind of busy.
Busy?
Yeah, she's working right now.
Presents herself as a woman. Normal practice within a trans feminist perspective, which intersectional feminism necessarily includes, has to accept Projekt Melody identification as a woman, going beyond trans feminist interpretation and into the field of just basic manners. Modern manners say you use the pronouns people identify by. If somebody says that they use she, her pronouns, then you use she, her pronouns for them. This is basic manners in the modern era. That being said, we know that the person within Projekt Melody is female. As I said in my introduction, due to the requirements imposed by US law and the requirements imposed by the terms of service of the site she is using, she is required to lodge her personal ID. Because of this, the person within Projekt Melody has to be the same person within Projekt Melody every time she streams. In addition to this, Projekt Melody might secretly be a male, fits into a long-standing practice on the internet of diminishing the accomplishments of women by stating that they are male accomplishments. Parallels with, say, J.K. Rowling's recent dispute with Amin Khalif. While Projekt Melody's relationship with Twitch has been contentious, their account was taken down during a site-wide mass ban of certain streamers over copyright infringements. They still generate the majority of their income through the platform. First, I'm not sure that she does generate a majority of income via Twitch. Can't recall her speaking either way on the subject.
This is my favorite thing. It's my number one thing. Twitch isn't my number one thing. No, I want to be known as the one. That's me.
Right.
Yeah. No, it makes me sad if they don't know.
However, I find it curious the author did not go into more depth about Projekt Melody's copyright dispute with Digitrevex. In particular, I think the idea of a man claiming the ownership of a woman's body, either virtual or physical, has very important ramifications when we are making conversations about feminism. When you read Digitrevex's rants, there is a distinct misogynistic tone to it where he claims responsibility for all of Projekt Melody's successes, acts as if he deserves more of the money that she has made. I would have liked to see more of that particular discussion in this thesis, and I know things have to be cut for space. The idea that Projekt Melody is a gestalt individual was primarily spread by Digitrevex. So it is possible that this concept was a deliberate abusive tactic to undermine further Projekt Melody's accomplishments. The author gives an income estimate and sources it from WikisPro. WikisPro is a sludge site. It is a mess of poorly sourced, unverified biographical data that is presented to capture SEO. It is not a reliable source, and I am surprised. If somebody had given me an essay with sources from WikisPro or sludge sites like that when I was teaching, I would not have accepted it. I'm a little puzzled why this was allowed in a master's thesis level document. It is a source that is less reliable than Wikipedia, and nobody would accept Wikipedia. Similarly suggestive in comparison to Projekt Melody, the top hot tub streamers' income mostly fall into the $100,000s to $1 million range. As one of the most popular categories of streamers on Twitch, these women, derogatorily referred to as Twitch thoughts, and the fact that their income is significantly less than Melody's demonstrates that their human forms are less profitable than an avatar form in the industry of constructing and marketing fantasies. I don't think just the avatar that's creating this difference. Vtubers, not just Melody, are popular on Twitch because having an avatar means that you are judged not on your body, but on your ability as an entertainer and as a streamer. It levels the playing field and also gives a certain degree of protection from harassment. In addition, it seems to be very effective for people with certain forms of anxiety. Some argue that despite their use of platforms like Chatterbait, which exist explicitly for the purposes of performance and the consumption of sex worker labour, Projekt Melody's virtual body excludes them from the title of sex worker and the politics of that work. Now, I am going to fully acknowledge that this argument is not one of the author, but one she is presenting from other people. Projekt Melody fits completely within the spectrum of sex worker, given that sex worker includes occupations such as phone sex operator, professional erotic role players, adult voice actors, and those who perform erotic ASMR. There is a long tradition of forms of non-visual sex work. There are also forms of non-contact sex work. You cannot exclude Projekt Melody from being a sex worker without excluding a lot of other things that are widely regarded as sex work. An avatar is not limited by the same constraints that real sex workers must consider. Logical imagined avatar, they are purely a projection of male fantasies and have little reason to say no to anything. I'm a general audience streamer who doesn't do anything like what Mel does. Even me, with my gender fuckery, gets requests that fall outside my boundaries, and I have to mitigate them myself. I have watched Projekt Melody streams. I am aware that she gets requests that fall outside of her boundaries. I have also turned them down with politeness and grace. This idea that because she's not presenting her physical body, she is free of constraints and boundaries is a very dangerous one. With Projekt Melody's true identity completely obscured and their physical body being removed from their labour, I'll just point out that because of the nature of the way the sex toys work in Melody, her body is directly being impacted. They do not face the same risks of doxing. Downplays a lot of the dangers and problems Projekt Melody faces. There was a dedicated doxing gang for the harassment of Melody and the other Vtubers within her company. So having a virtual avatar does not protect you completely from being doxed. As a female-coded sex worker, Melody needs no community care to preserve themselves or to network. They are outside the concerns of the activist and advocacy concerns over which sex workers band together. They do not face the risk of criminalisation. Unfortunately, especially given the level of conservative and wowserism that exists in today's society, I don't think any form of sex work is free from the risk of criminalisation. In addition, Melody suffers from a lot of the regulatory networks that act to oppress sex workers. For example, due to her status as a sex worker, she is unable to use common facilities such as PayPal.
Check out through PayPal. Ha! Joke's on you! I'm banned for life. Okay. What aren't you banned from? Your heart? I'm banned because I violated the morality clause. Despite not buying anything graphic, just paying artists, really, some tech people, banned for being a sex worker, so that's cool.
Even though she is effectively employed by Amazon via Twitch, she is blocked from using Amazon services. She further suffers stigma and is seen as a brand risk by advertisers, restricting the opportunities for sponsorships that she has.
And so some other companies are like, I'll take a chance, yeah. And so it continues on. Like, even since then, though, I've had a bunch of people cancel on me or send me mean letters or be like, never mind, or like, I know we were setting it up with a contract, but morality law, we're voiding it, and mean letters, yeah.
Indeed, she is often concerned that her nature as a brand risk damages her friends and co-workers within VShojo. When Pornhub shifted its rules in a way that meant that she was no longer able to publish onto Pornhub. In addition, she has advocated against No Nut November, a mimetic tool propagated by alt-right people who use it as an attempt to deprive sex workers of income.
Are you going to participate in No Newt November, or are you skipping out? I do not support No Newt at all. I do not support it at all, because that can be dangerous to your human bodily functionings by not letting yourself do a thing. Nah, man. I like depravity, but not depriving yourself. It's okay to not be okay. You don't have to be sunshine rainbows every fucking second of the day. You don't have to have a full erection first thing in the morning. Well, actually, I think that's more of a parasympathetic reaction. But I mean, like, emotionally, you don't need to be given 102%.
I then shift my focus to intersectional feminist notions of embodiment in relation to sex work. Projekt Melody's algorithmically mediated body in the context of online intimate labour invokes feminist works on identity building in tandem with the virtual and physical body. To this point, and I know further on, there's no reference to cyborg feminism, which I would think would be a useful perspective to examine Projekt Melody under. I'll have to explain cyborg feminism first. In culture and in earlier forms of feminism, there are binary dichotomies between man and woman, and there are also binary dichotomies between human and machine. In cyborg feminism, we examine the breakdown of those binaries when machine and human merge. to become a cyborg. Technological interventions such as hormonal transitioning and the type of cross-gender queerness that even my presentation has is a form of this cyborgification of gender. Particular important for Projekt Melody as her aesthetics borrow very heavily from Ghost in the Shell, a anime about cyborgs, and indeed the idea of a mind and a brain being encased in a prosthetic mechanical shell. Imperialist and colonial constructions of sexuality are intrinsic to Projekt Melody as a technological performer coded as Japanese. I think it is difficult to analyse Projekt Melody without also including the wider scope of the Vtuber community. The Vtuber community and Vtubing as a genre and form of technical performance originates in Japan, which as a former colonial power and a former imperial power, note the former in that statement is doing a lot of heavy lifting and is probably straining under the weight of history. But at VTubing's very core, there is a cross-cultural cross-pollination. The biggest VTubing company in Japan, HoloLive, calls itself that as a way to gain the cultural cachet and the cool factor of English, while at the same time, the biggest VTubing company in the English-speaking world, arguably VShojo, which uses a Japanese-derived name in much the same way. Both of these companies, by the way, have branches within the respective other sides. So HoloLive has English-speaking branches and Indonesian branches, while VShojo has a Japanese branch. On sites like OnlyFans and Chaturbate, companies additionally assign value and uphold hierarchies with rankings. These rankings are represented by a percent that is visible in creators' headers that refers to their subscriber counts in relation to the entire user population. I have checked on Chaturbate and OnlyFans. I can't find this percentage that the author was referring to. It could have been something that was present at the time of writing, which has now been removed. I know on Chaturbate there was a competition system that deliberately set models against each other. I also know that this system was extremely unpopular and its removal was highly appreciated by the models. Meanwhile, due to how Projekt Melody's novelty gives them an advantage over the competition, distance from facets of human identity such as race or ability, and exemption from such network governance of an avatar, Projekt Melody escapes many of the network governance effects. Projekt Melody was novel once. The thing about novelty is that it fades. She wasn't even the first Lewdtuber on Chaturbate. That probably goes down to Abby Oddly, who was it was more cartoon based and a much more simple implementation of the idea. And now she isn't the only one. There is a small community of Lewdtubers who work on Chaturbate and other sites like it, to the point that even within fora for cam models will respond to somebody being surprised at an animated avatar on a live streaming site with, "Oh, that's just another VTuber." Projekt Melody's lack of connection to the community of sex workers, a community formation necessary for sex workers' continued survival, also distinguishes them from the average sex worker whose income depends on content creation. Statement: I have to carefully negotiate around some taboos, and taboos which are present for both safety and artistic reasons. Within the community of cam models, Projekt Melody's inner person is somebody who is recognised. She has a connection to that community because she is a part of that community. In addition, avatar-based sex work doesn't exclude you from the need to have a peer community. There are peer communities for avatar-based sex workers in existence. I'd also point out that there are creators like Vex Ruby using the money to fund her training as a mental health practitioner because she wants to support sex workers and other people with non-conventional lifestyles in relationship to sex. These ways in which Projekt Melody lacks a purpose or place within sex worker communities serves to illustrate the vast difference in their form of sex work versus human sex work and vice versa. Again, I dislike the dehumanization in this statement, and I will go back to my previous statements about how Projekt Melody and how other VTuber sex workers interact both with the greater community of sex workers and within their own community. Unlike other content creators, Melody also has little need to consider competition and building connections to succeed, cope with stigma and avoid shadow banning, the algorithmic practice that limits visibility of certain user content on social media, and censorship. When the body is absent in platform sex work, avoiding such censorship is relatively easy. Even general audience VTubers are policed more strictly than their fleshtuber equivalents. We have to self-censor a lot stricter than other streamers. The rules on our content have been enforced to a higher degree than more conventional streamers who use their bodies directly. Both YouTube, Twitch, and Chatterbait have banned VTubers over censorship reasons. In particular, there are a lot of ASMR-based performances that get demonetized, banned, or had their channels banned as well. At this very moment, VTubers like Fifi and Bungo Tiger, they also go by other names, are fighting Twitch and YouTube to get their channels reinstated after censorship-based bans. Having a VTuber avatar does not make you immune to censorship. Indeed, we are policed a lot tighter than our equivalents. They mention Projekt Melody's second ban over copyright infringement. They don't mention Mel's first ban, which was over the presence of a sex toy in the background of one of her first streams when she was on Twitch. Due to the low risk assigned to them by algorithms and content moderators, Melody is separated from the community of sex workers who rely on one another to surpass, subvert, or cope with shadow banning and content moderation. Projekt Melody is not only free from such concerns, but benefits from them. I am confused why the author thinks Projekt Melody and other lewd VTubers have a particular blessing from the algorithm. As a sex worker operating on these adult content performers, as well as vanilla streaming on Twitch, PM's brand as an avatar allows for a more effortless rise to mainstream success, differentiating them from human sex workers and their communities. I think this discounts a lot of the heavy lifting and a lot of the work Projekt Melody has done. It is not easy. Decriminalisation, deconstructing stigma, and contesting foster siesta are especially salient causes that sex workers organise around. None of these concerns apply to a sex worker who runs their business in the absence of a body, and thus Projekt Melody has no personal investment in such community organisation and causes. First, I question the implication in this that everybody has to be an advocate. There are, within this world of differential power, there are frequently situations where somebody has to attend to their own face mask before helping others. That being said, I think Projekt Melody has been very successful in advocating for sex worker causes. In particular, through her podcast, she has platformed other sex workers, and in particular on the topic of deconstructing stigma by working in both Twitch and CB. She has presented herself as an authentic person who also does porn. Then attacks on sex workers, including Projekt Melody, becomes an attack on their friend, their community leader, hence a greater desire to push back against those things. Causes such as racial, disability, or trans sex worker rights are far outside the concerns of an avatar. In fact, Projekt Melody has continuously and consistently refused to acknowledge any of these political or social realities in any form. This is incredibly inconsistent with what I have experienced with Projekt Melody. In particular, I would go to the platforming and support of her friend Ironmouse, who is a Puerto Rican woman with a chronic illness.
I'm just telling you, I'll never forget that day that we were talking and you were like, you just like straight up told me you wanted to take care of me, and that really like got to me. I was like, no one's ever told me that in my life.
I'm glad you can deal with my creepy bossy.
And then you did. Look at us now. Here we are.
Indeed. She's talked to Mousy about how bad the US medical system is, especially for people with disabilities. Projekt Melody has talked about in passing about her own disabilities, both neurological and psychological, and how it influences her abilities to work.
I'm not the most consistent as I used to be because I have mood problems, which is unfortunate, but I'm trying. So thank you.
The casualness of the way she discusses those topics, I think, does a lot of work to destigmatize them and normalize them.
Thanks to your community, I got the motivation to finally start HRT, and the Lewdtubers was killing me. Oh, I'm sorry. You're blaming us for making you too. I'm really happy for you. I love when people find themselves. Thank you. Same for you, Headspaces. Wow. Hey man, I'm just saying, y'all. I'm just saying. I like to hear when people are on their self-exploration in this universe, and when they feel strong enough to pursue whatever that it is that they wish to pursue. I'm happy for people doing what they want and stuff.
Projekt Melody has campaigned along with her fan community against the attempts to exclude sex workers from OnlyFans. She has spoken out and on the issues of Roe versus Wade and its overturning. It is not to say she has continuously and consistently refused to acknowledge any of these issues, complete misrepresentation of what she has done in the world. It seems reasonable then that Melody has invoked resentment amongst the human sex worker community. I wouldn't use human here because by contrast it dehumanises Melody, and dehumanisation is something that we should avoid in any of our rhetoric. Now that the novelty and shock has worn off, I don't think this resentment is as active or strong, and I don't think it now represents a majority or widely held view from what I've seen and from what I've experienced. However, in Projekt Melody's case, a body is not the product being sold. Unlike all other forms of sex work, the product of labour is sheer fantasy, a character that can be switched on and off. All sex work is selling a fantasy. The fantasy is the first thing that is sold. The body comes afterwards. Stripping sells a fantasy. Full service sex work sells a fantasy. Professional BDSM participants sell a fantasy. Hosts and hostesses at clubs sell a fantasy. This is not something that's unique to Projekt Melody. It's not something that's unique to cam models. This is very core to sex work. Lastly, as a technological object versus a human sex worker, the performance of the work is likely conducted by multiple operators, separating Projekt Melody from online sex workers who individually manage their content, client interactions, streams, income, and brand without any assistance. Projekt Melody's performance is clearly performed by one person. This is due to the legal requirements that all US sites have to abide by. In addition, there is a consistency of voice, mannerism, behaviour, personality that would be infeasible to reproduce across many people. If Projekt Melody was a gestalt performer, she would not need to take breaks for her physical and mental health, as she could have somebody sub in. On the other side, many online sex workers have managers. Many online sex workers have people responsible for their cameras, their lighting. Many online sex workers will have somebody typing in the chat, pretending to be the performer on screen. It is also worth mentioning that with this likelihood of Projekt Melody being a product of multiple individuals' labour, it is possible at least one male participates in maintaining Melody and carrying out her work. If I was in my maths educator mode, I would talk about vicarious truth, how the implication from a falsehood is paradoxically true. However, since I'm not in that mode, I will say that if the person inside Projekt Melody was male, there are certain interactions when you go into VTubing where seeing a body responding to your movements, acting as you react, causes a neurological feedback loop where your body feels as if your body is the one on screen. For certain individuals, this can trigger forms of gender dysphoria or gender euphoria. If an assigned male at birth individual was the person inside Projekt Melody, by the nature of what Projekt Melody does and is, that performance would be more akin to drag or trans performance and would have to be analysed in that perspective. Assumptions that Projekt Melody is female, even as an avatar, are problematic and misinformed at best. They inevitably demonstrate the ways in which patriarchy expects femininity to be formed from a male subject position. Again, the idea that prominent women are secretly men on the internet is a dangerous meme that needs to be examined whenever we reiterate it, because of the way it tends to delegitimize women's efforts. The streaming platform Twitch, a camming site largely centred on gaming and one that is dominated by males, has become a new domain for misogyny in gaming. 10 out of 10, no notes, completely agree. I would then extend it, though, to point out that each streamer's communities are derived from the behaviour of the streamer and their policing and management of their communities. The minimal amount of misogynistic harassment directed at Projekt Melody within a streaming platform rife with harassment, trolling and doxing against women suggests that they are paradoxically perceived as more authentic, an essential component to Twitch streaming success. I think this downplays a lot of the work that Projekt Melody and her moderation team do at community management. In particular, Projekt Melody is very good at modelling the behaviour she wants to see out of her community. She is careful to never be misogynistic. She is careful to promote and support other women. Indeed, when misogynistic comments are made about other streamers, in particular so-called titty streamers, she is very careful and very direct to shut those type of statements down. She has collabed with Amaranth, one of the most prominent so-called titty streamers, and she has spoken positively of them. I'll also include here a video about how she managed negative behaviour on part of her community and pivoted their behaviour to a positive one.
And then a forum that is toxic, and that for my fellow streamers, if you go there, you're not going to glean any constructive criticism, just people being rude, but a certain web forum place that has green text there started talking about me, and they're like, ha 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 ha, a little funny, look at all the workers, they're so upset with this anime girl, let's go there, support the Melody and dunk on everyone else. And that's how we had like 35,000. That's why we crashed the page. Like, they just came in a swarm and they were bringing negativity to other rooms too. And they were starting like the phrase too. It's like, yeah, mill train, let's do it. I was mad because people were very mad. And very quickly, yeah, it lasted a few weeks of me being real bossy. And eventually we were able to transform that to bros glad, because I wanted to cultivate something healthy. I know with all the streamers that I watch, I mean, I wasn't on Twitch. I didn't want to be on Twitch. I mean, on the cam sites. The ones with negativity weren't nice to hang out in. They weren't. I know one of my friends at the time, kind of friends, had started the concept, or at least popularized, of cosplay camming and stuff. And so they were very on board and helpful, good advice. Yeah, no, toxicity sucks and I hate it and I don't want to have a legacy of that. That's horrible and lame and dumb, and we live in a society. But yeah, it was difficult trying to juggle of being like, guys, you're my community that I'm developing, which is crazy. I love you guys. I want to support you, but also I'm not liking the mentality that you have. I'm so sorry. Can we try and convert that? A lot of people hated that opinion, made a lot of mean videos. I got interviews from different articles where they tricked me, or I'd take hours and hours to talk about technological innovation and my sci-fi influences from like Stevenson and Kurzweil and Do You Dream of Electric Sheep and Ghost in the Shell, and also talking about work and and normalization of that. And I went on and on and on, and so many of them ignored it because they already had their decision, their conclusion, and I wasn't helping them reach that, so that was disappointed.
The character maintains a captive male audience, in part due to their lack of participation in feminist discussion, as they can never challenge their chatters and customers' sexism, a trait widely appreciated by men on Twitch. The people who are interested in, say, hour-long videos about feminist theory are few and far between. Such videos are not the way you get popular for any content creator. Research into the changing of opinions, ideas, and ideology has shown that direct challenge rarely works and is often counter-effective. The way that Projekt Melody manages her community and introduces a lot of these ideas naturalistically and not using the jargon of feminist discourse. Indeed, the fact that her community is free of misogyny is a result of what she has done to carefully police and promote alternatives and healthier ways of relating to half of the population of the earth. While Projekt Melody's tolerance and handling of sexist chatters in a geek masculinity culture and the stigma discourse surrounding titty streams still comprises much of their labour, the consequences of this for an embodied human and for an avatar are clearly different. I have some questions about the author's citation practices here, because Cullen doesn't at any point refer to Projekt Melody. It seems that they were only quoted for geek masculinity and titty streaming, which, given the context of the site, I feel that it misrepresents what is cited. It's not a practice that I necessarily would support. The labour itself is perhaps purely technological, weeding out blatant trolls, chatters who violate community guidelines, threats, etc. As someone who's had experience in managing online communities, you cannot solve social problems with purely technical measures. They are a tool that you can use, but at its core, the labour is social. The labour is modelling. The labour is embodying the standards you wish to have. The labour is encouraging people to adopt the values of the community that you wish to build. The labour is emotional. Technology is a tool. At its core, community management is a social act. While scholarship in sex work studies has begun to be addressed by scholarship in sex work studies and media studies, I have all the empathy for the author in this sentence. I too have written clunkers of sentences that have somehow gotten through editing and review and showing things to my friends. And sometimes, no matter what you do, you have a sentence which says the floor is made of floor. I can't feel anything but empathy here. However, unlike human online providers who spend a great deal of time on custom content and flirting with clients to uphold authenticity, Projekt Melody may not spend as much time engaging with their customers directly. As somebody who works as a VTuber and as somebody who knows many VTubers as peers and as a viewer of VTubers, there is an inordinate amount of off-screen work that goes into being a VTuber. It is obvious that Projekt Melody's gendered labour as an artificial sex worker operated by riggers who are completely anonymous is entirely distinct from that of human female content creators. First, I am always a little bit sketchy of sentences that start off, "It is obvious," when it kinda isn't. I am of the view, given what I've seen and my experiences, that both flesh and non-flesh forms of sex work exist within a spectrum and a continuum. They are not entirely distinct. They are a member of a field that blurs and intermixes. However, I also want to note a purely technical issue with this sentence. Riggers do not operate VTuber models. A rigger is a artistic/technical role whose responsibility is to create the mathematical functions that translate the captured movements into movements on screen. They are the people who help set up the models. They are the puppet makers to the puppeteers. The people inside drive the behaviour. The riggers give us the models to wear, to inhabit, to be within. Despite this absence of a human gender, they must uphold the illusion of femininity by legitimizing themselves and their work in online spaces characterized by misogyny. I would say that to some readings, upholding the illusion of femininity, it is gender performance. Perhaps notions of illegitimacy can be entertained based upon the fact that Projekt Melody subverts the intimate nature of streaming. I think, why are we giving prime consideration to the visual sense over any other sense? Is the visual a prerequisite for intimacy? Do I have to see someone in order for it to be intimate? Could the words of a lover softly in my ear be just as intimate as seeing them? I do not think that seeing something makes it any more legitimate than the use of other senses. Seems to be a particular aspect of our culture that we give a heightened value to what we see over our other senses. If intimacy is synonymous with authenticity, then the fact with Projekt Melody, the sense of realness is neither intimate nor is it seemingly necessary to their audience. I don't think the image of a person's body makes something necessarily more intimate. Indeed, it is often said that people, when they are wearing a mask, can be more genuine. And I think that genuine relationship can lead to a form of deeper intimacy, or a kind of para-intimacy, given this is a sort of parasocial, quasi-social relationship. Projekt Melody was imagined as a Japanese coded character with the avatar's fair skin, large breasts, wide hips, big butt, and signature big, round, manga-style eyes. I am not sure what model of Projekt Melody that the author was looking at, because at time of publication, this wasn't what Projekt Melody was imagined.
What? Thick thighs save lives. My thighs are thin, but ready to win. My legs are lean. But what is a spleen? Rhyming is difficult. My legs are tiny and so is my hiney. Anyway,
And yes, currently she is sporting a large-breasted model, but that's not the Melody who became popular. This section, the author analyses Projekt Melody from a Marxist perspective. Yet, the domestic or private nature of Projekt Melody's form of service work is society far less vulnerable from other modes of service provision on and offline, wherein the erasure of their body and identity makes their work less exploitable and alienating versus more so. Isn't the core aspect of alienation the destruction of identity in your work product? I can't understand how you would argue that by alienating herself, she is less alienated. Maybe I am misunderstanding some nuances of Marxist theory, but this argument doesn't seem to be a proper application of that theory to this situation. While they do not participate in sex work organising and activism within the community, nor do they address any discourse on the structural or political conditions of sex work whatsoever.
I want to continue to support adult content creators. It's just hard because they keep pushing us into the shadows. Joke's on you, universe. We will always be here, whether we're hiding or in plain sight. Oldest profession. Those of you who put legislature to take us out, you must have the most boringest times in your bedroom, and I pity thee. Your penis must be so bored right now.
I have repeatedly stated that Projekt Melody talks about herself as a sex worker and discusses issues relating to sex work, in addition to platforming other sex workers and using community management as a form of practice and normalization. To maintain the fantasy, the audience easily and voluntarily neglects to consider the human on the other side of the avatar. But as the operator steps into a melody as a character and a body, their corporeal self is still intimately involved in the performance, as they physically move in tandem with the character. Physically, emotionally, and sexually, the operator and melody become one body, day in and day out. This is the best written paragraph in the entire essay. The problem is, I don't think the author took time to go back over the essay and address how this understanding affected the other points she made. This directly addresses the superposition of melody and the person within melody. It addresses the cyborg nature of melody and other VTubers. This is the core metaphor. This is why you need to understand melody in the context of VTubing, and in the context of the metaphor of the cyborg. Even in this brilliant and insightful paragraph, I would say that, however, the audience is not neglecting to consider the human on the other side of the avatar. This is a willing suspension of disbelief. It is the same type of willing suspension of disbelief as somebody who watches a wrestling match, who watches live theatre. We understand that the actor, wrestler, mocap performer is not the character, but we also willingly blur the lines between those two. When fan art of VTubers is made with them streaming, they'll often be drawn sitting at a desk with their motion capture iPhone set up, but the body in the character of the person. This is also reflected in the recent VTuber anime VTuber Legend. There's a willing suspension of disbelief that the character is the streamer. It's not a situation of neglect, but a situation of voluntary suspension. For example, we might consider that if a glitch takes place while Melody is performing a striptease on Chatterbait, the intermediate experience is entirely lost, even just for a moment. No, we do not have to suppose this. Melody has had many streams where there has been scuff. She and her fans are not unfamiliar with glitches and things going wrong. In fact, I would argue that this increases the intimate experience rather than decreases it. A perfect experience is in a way inhuman. However, everybody has made mistakes. Everybody has had scuff in their life. It is human. It is real. It is a common place of meeting. As passive, sexually submissive, innocent, obedient, a stereotype that is reaffirmed in the genres of manga and anime, and by male otaku who consume them. Have you met any male otaku? Have you seen the way they beg for women to step on them? Have you seen tsundere? Passive and obedient are not as common in modern manga and anime as you would think. Anime with assertive women, common, especially in more recent ones where you need an assertive woman in the plot because the men are so weak-toast and herbivorous that they actually need a kick in the ass to actually do something to progress the relationship on. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. But I think there is a wider diversity of characters in anime and manga, and I think the otaku are completely aware of that. The nuts, bolts, and wires on Melody's body, their cyberpunk scenes, the technology used to create and operate Projekt Melody, and her kawaii anime aesthetic all point to a parallel with this gendered and Asianized fantasy of robots. As I've said in other places, I think the fantasy is more cyborg than robot. Anime's popularity in the West can be attributed to the correlation between Japan and play. Yes, it can be attributed to that. I think it's an overly reductionist and limiting thing. It is like saying Hollywood's popularity in the West can be attributed to the correlation between California and theme parks. I think anime's popularity in the West can also be attributed to the skills of the artist, the way that many of the stories resonate with, in particular, with the otaku community and the experiences the otaku community have. the skills of the storytelling. And also, in particular, anime's popularity in the West can be attributed to Japanese government's policy of using its culture to project soft power into the rest of the world. Moon Channel's done a particularly good video on this topic, and there was a recent really brilliant paper on how Indonesian VTubers have become a part of Indonesia's soft power projection into the rest of the world. I'm going to cite it here, but I'm also probably going to do a dedicated video on that paper because it is fascinating and brilliant, and I would love that idea to be spread into the broader universe. The whimsical cuteness of kawaii culture, Harajuku, iconic characters such as Hello Kitty have become quintessential in white Westerners' perceptions of Japan, its cultural production, and the offering of opportunities for vicarious play. Harajuku is definitely a focus of kawaii culture and Japanese street fashion, but if you're talking about otaku culture, and even though it is a massive tourist trap, think you would go more for Akihabara for this particular example. But that being said, the associations are also prevalent in anime and manga, texts that frequently include youthful and hyper-feminine women and girls. Otaku culture, frequently associated with white men, celebrates these qualities of female characters and immerse themselves in desire for fictional romance and sexuality. I've seen a lot of black otaku, and I know of a massive Latin American otaku scene. Of course, Brazil is a different case altogether with their relationship with Japan and Japanese cultural products. I don't think frequently associated with white men truly captures the whole thing. Oh, and we can't talk about otaku culture without also talking about fugoshi and women. Rather than its character herself, Projekt Melody is a layered fictional context, as described by Kotani M., a Japanese psychiatrist who takes psychoanalytical perspective on otaku. Given some of the classic otaku traits, such as near obsessive interests in a particular topic, as in gaze avoidance, as in social submission, and the inability to read social clues and read the room, I don't think a psychoanalytical perspective on otaku is very useful compared to an alternative perspective based on concepts of neurodiversity. In fact, given the psychoanalytical community's mistreatment and blundering on neurodiverse issues, refrigerator mothers, I would take their perspective on this with a grain of salt. This is apparent when we consider the fact that Projekt Melody is a genderless subject who is the product of anonymous operator and riggers. We know the genders of the riggers of unknown genders. I don't think perceiving her as a genderless subject is something that is compatible with a broad understanding of both gender and Projekt Melody. When sex work is removed from gender, how may we approach the subject? I think we have to examine it in the light that we examine all sex work and the broader spectrum of intimacy work and parasocial entertainment. We have to look at it the same perspective as male performers, such as Vox Acima, who give boyfriend experiences. We have to examine it in the same context as we do for host and hostesses at host and hostess clubs. There is a gender dimension. Projekt Melody does not remove this gender dimension. However, sex work is not inherently gendered. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the gendered nature of sex work is a product of capitalism that for a large proportion of the history, men have had greater access to finances. The topic of online sex worker, the topic of VTubing, and the topic of Projekt Melody in particular, and other Lewdtubers such as Vex Ruby are really fascinating topics. I think there is a lot of room for improvement. I think there's a lot of room for more research and deeper understanding. It is quite possible that this paper or something like it needed to be written by somebody who is a part of the community. To adapt a community slogan, nothing about us without us. I would welcome you watching more of my videos as we slowly attempt to get enough watch time to actually monetize. Please feel free to subscribe for cultural criticism, mathematics, weirdly gendered, strange VTubing, mix-up, cyborg, who knows what. Frankly, I don't know what my content is anymore. Never have. But if you want it, sub for it. Goodbye.